I'm just about to go live. Shout it out. Good afternoon, everybody, and good evening to people in Bangladesh
and India,
and in many other parts of the world. And this is the Peace and Justice Zoom call to discuss the situation in Bangladesh and the wider implications for the region. The person sitting next to me is Talal Karim, who's a very good friend of mine and very active supporter of the Peace and Justice Project, which is hosting this call. And we are an organization dedicated to what it sounds like, peace and justice. And so we take up global issues as well as many issues in the UK, such as fighting racism, supporting Palestine, and many other issues. And just to let everyone know, on the 14th of September, we're holding the second of our international conferences, which is a hybrid event, which will be held both at Queen Mary University in London and on Zoom calls and YouTube all around the world. So please look out for that, and you're very, very welcome to join it. The discussion today will be about the situation in Bangladesh. We have been following it from afar. We've been following it from within the diaspora community in Britain, where it's had a very, very big and very salutary effect. We're also looking at it from the point of view of the students, of those that work in the garment industry and others, those that work in agriculture, and those that work in the service sector, as well as those in academics and many others in Bangladesh that are all so affected by what is happening. So we've got a number of speakers today, all of whom are going to be fairly brief. So there will be time for questions to them and to discussion. And the first one I want to call is Saeed Naqvi, who will give us a brief 7-minute overall view of the implications of what's happened in Bangladesh with the region as a whole. So I want to thank you all for joining, thank all of our speakers for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to what everyone has to say. And it's now over to you to start, Saeed, and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let me begin at the beginning. It's always useful to do that. In 1947, the independence of India and India's partition happened at the same time. The celebration and the tragedy accompanied each other. The result was that more or less from the very beginning, one country became the other's obsession, Pakistan and India. And not only were we in competition, but we were globally trying to neutralize each other on every issue, particularly Kashmir. Then in 1971, something very dramatic happened. People don't realize it that way, that actually the geography of the subcontinent changed. India suddenly became a large country surrounded by a string of small countries. Now, as would happen in any balance of power situation, all the countries on the periphery began to coordinate their attitude towards India. India, not only was it the largest, but there was another peculiarity. No other country had its border with the other. All borders were with India. And therefore, India was more or less could dictate some terms. Ziaur Rahman as President Ziaur Rahman, he thought of SAARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. That is, all the regional countries, including India, become a sort of South Asia in a scrum kind of thing. And he thought of it at a time when the four modernizations of China had been enunciated by Deng Xiaoping. In other words, in SAARC's ken, the rise of China was there from the very beginning. So was it in India's also. All these countries began to flourish a a China card in their lapel uh, to balance India, as it were. Now, here was a completely new situation, which diplomacy, statesmanship dictated that India managed this new geography. But habits die hard. We could not get out of the straitjacket of the Indo Pakistan competition, an Indo Pakistan dialogue, and very soon India became Pakistan's internal affair, and Pakistan became India's internal affair, and that is how everything proceeded. So therefore, SARC, which could have been a wonderful idea, floundered on the rock, as far as India is concerned, the rock called Pakistan. They would That would be the point from where SARC could never take off. Uh, Here you had a completely new creative situation. What was Bangladesh? What was Bangladesh's? India and Pakistan had been halved, among other factors, on a two nation theory. That means Hindus and Muslims form two nations. 1971 blew that thesis to smithereens because it turned out that religion was not going to be a cohesive enough glue to keep nations together. Now, Bangladesh evolved completely differently from Pakistan. Bangladesh, if you ever annually during the New Year Christmas season, you can gauge a person's social popularity in the urban areas of metropolitan India. You see by the number of greeting cards on the cornice in the drawing room. Every year in the month of April, I used to get a card very ornately handwritten by Dr. Murli Manohar Joshi, who was once upon a time president of the BJP. Now, we differed on everything, but he was a person who engaged people, and one could have a dialogue with him. Now, when I received this card, I put it away as one of Dr. Joshi's eccentricities until I turned up in Bangladesh on the 15th of April and saw the riot of color that Poilo Baisakh is. In other words, that is the Bengali New Year celebrated in ancient times and celebrated today with greater vigor that I saw than even our West Bengal. I saw much more of it in Dhaka than I ever see in Calcutta. And I know that my Bengali friends in Calcutta would be cross with me, but that is the fact. It was the Maidan was a riot of colors, red saris, all colors of the world, and every woman with a bindi. Now, bindi and a sari, these are very, very Indian aesthetics. It is not something that you won't find it in Kashmir and the Northwest. No, you will not. Now, what is this? In other words, Bangladeshis celebrate the New Year of antiquity here in India with greater vigor and enthusiasm than we do in India. That was you. I remember going to the house of Mahfouz Anam, he's a famous editor, and his lovely party, and there was his wife with a tray full of bindis, and every lady who came in the guest, she planted a bindi on the forehead. In the distance, I heard strains of Rabindra Sangeet, the Sangeet created by the great poet Rabindranath Tagore, who has the status of the national poet of India. He is the author of India's national anthem, and he also happens to be the author of Bangladesh's national anthem. And these songs are interspersed with Qazi Nazrul Islam's Sangeet. Now, the irony here was that while Tagore is totally secular, Nazrul Geet is full of Tandav, Shakti, Kali, Durga, Shiva, all the Hindu icons. And we have arbitrarily made him the national poet of Bangladesh. Now, that is the picture. I remember, what are the complexes that grow out of this neighborhood? I remember going with Morarji Desai as Prime Minister to Pakistan, and then he had a dialogue with. One of the things the Bangladeshis wanted was food grains. So an enormous amount of food grains was sanctioned. It was given, and I remember sitting. I was part of the press team. I remember sitting in my room, and Prakash Shah, who was then in the PMO, Prime Minister's office, and he came running and he said, "Look, let's get together and watch television." There was only one national TV, and see how they play up the talks. Now the Prakash, then it was Hasmukh Shah, then there was Raju, a whole lot of them, Kabul, they came in. And they waited and waited and waited to see what the Bangladeshi national television was going to say about the transfer of grain. They said not a word. Now, what is the point? The point is that while India, the Indian delegation, was eager as it was to extract some kind of demonstrable gratitude from the Bangladeshis, the Bangla team was equally determined to deny the Indian team just that. So this was the kind of nuance in the relationship. There was always a residual Pakistani element. There was always a Jamaat. There was always the syncretic element that I find so romantic and so nice and attractive seemed to me to be the dominant theme. But there was always an Islamic edge in society in Bangladesh. Now, there's one more story. Inder Gujral as Prime Minister wanted to have India, Pakistan, Bangladesh dialogue in Dhaka. I received a call from him. He said, "Saeed, why don't you join us?" Now, in that delegation, the press consisted of every Banerjee, Mukherjee, Ghosh, Basu, I remember Nikhil Chakravarti, the whole lot. Everyone was a Bengali. Why me? Well, because Inder thought that a notional Muslim name might not go down badly and as part of his press delegation. That's my assumption. Now, as I land in Bangladesh, you have the press team and the rest, they go through customs, and as they do, you have the other side and the Indians and the Muslims in the press team got so intermingled that one was indistinguishable from the other. Bhalo bhalo ki khabar ilish mash, bap re bap, same language. And I, in my life, have never felt more lonesome with my Islamic identity. That was Bangladesh for you. And now if I'm afraid, is that a challenge now? Is there a danger? And that should be a matter of it's a matter of concern to me. It's a matter of concern should be to India, because don't forget that Bangladesh has a very sizable Hindu population, just as India has a sizable Muslim population. Now, so far, yes. Well, Jeremy, I am more or less done. That is the main theme, and And if there are any queries, I'll come back. I'll come back again.
Saeed, thank you very, very much. That's really helpful and very good comprehensive analysis, which leads us on to the more detailed Bangladesh specific points that are going to be made, and then there'll be questions, and I'll bring you back in that discussion. But that's very, very helpful and very knowledgeable outline. Thank you very much. I, for one, have learnt a lot from it. Could I now call on Simi to speak, please? Simi Wadood, who's a lecturer at the Department of Law in the University of Dhaka, and she will take us through the legal and human rights issues so far as the law is concerned. And so I look forward to what you have to say, Simi, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. This afternoon in London, anyway, evening for you. You're most welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for the kind invite and for hosting this. It's a pleasure to be joining you all today to discuss Bangladesh. And also thank you for the very apt title, Bangladesh at a crossroads again, indeed. I'm just going to speak on the constitutional framework a bit, and I think I can later add to the discussion as well through my answers if there are any questions. As we all know that in July, Bangladesh kind of experienced something unprecedented. It was a mass movement that Bangladesh witnessed, and that led to the ouster of the 15-year rule of Sheikh Hasina. And after that, the interim government has now assumed power, and it's being led by Professor Dr. Yunus. So the entire political settlement with the interim government, it raised certain constitutional questions that deserve answers. And I think I should also give a background to sort of lead us into the discussion with more nuance. Bangladesh constitution as it stands right now, it doesn't really have any provision on an interim government or a caretaker government. A provision on a caretaker government, meaning a non-political, non-partisan government to hold general election to ensure peaceful transition into power, is something that was introduced into the constitution in 1996. And it was later declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court of Bangladesh, and it was cemented through a constitutional amendment when Bangladesh Awami League was in power. So certainly, textually speaking, we didn't have a provision for an interim government, but the constitution is also not a closed-door arrangement. I mean, definitely there is always room for interpretation. And that's what we saw. So there was basically an application of Article 106, reportedly. The president reached out to the Supreme Court for its opinion on what to do, because there was a unique situation. The prime minister resigned. She was not in the country to hold office until a new successor comes in, as it's said in the constitution that nothing shall bar the prime minister to hold office until a new successor comes in. So there was no possibility for that. And also the president went on to dissolve the parliament. So some scholarly observation was to the effect that perhaps an interim government may be formed with members of the then parliament. So it was also not possible because the parliament was dissolved by the president. So given the uniqueness of the situation under Article 106, the Supreme Court tendered its opinion to the president, and as a result, we saw the interim government, and it was opined by the Supreme Court that the interim government is the settlement that we need. This is the need of the hour, so it's constitutional, it's valid. So we can say that there are two layers of legitimacy to the interim government. First, that comes from the movement, and second, that comes from the opinion of the Supreme Court, that is the guardian of the Constitution, as per the Constitution. Now there is an interesting argument. There is a faction within Bangladesh academia that believes that it's kind of futile for the interim government to seek or try to derive legitimacy from the existing constitution. And they think that perhaps it's better for the interim government to sort of go for a new constitution making episode. So now that's very interesting, but that's where I would also like to sort of give my own opinion. I think that's something that's quite quite difficult. I would say it's not. It's difficult. I say for two reasons. First of all, it's not something that directly came from the movement. It's not something that the students demanded. It's something that we are sort of saying that could be one option to get out of the constitutional gridlock, but it's not something that we have seen the students and the people demand. Secondly, because as we have seen multiple instances of constitution making across the world, especially within Asia, it really does not lead to a very peaceful kind of arrangement, or it generally becomes a counterintuitive exercise in itself, because it's quite difficult to sort of cater to the voices and demands of the non-dominant voices, and it also to cater to the needs of the minority communities. So for these two reasons, I think perhaps it's not a ideal solution to the problem that to go for a new constitution making episode. Rather, what I believe is an ideal solution to the problem is a robust constitution amendment episode. So then again, a question comes as to whether the interim government can do that, and these two issues are interconnected. So first, I think the interim government, ideally, constitutionally speaking, cannot go for a constitution amendment episode, because essentially it's not an elected government, it's not an elected body. So if it wants to go for a constitution making episode, certainly it cannot, unless it elects a body of constituent assembly members who are then going to take on the task of making a new constitution. So that would inevitably also delay the process of transitioning into democracy, so to speak, or holding an election and going for a democratic party in power. So from that perspective as well, I think going for a new constitution would inevitably delay the process of whatever we were demanding from the very beginning, or the people were demanding from the very beginning. And second point comes in as to another demand that came from the students, the people in general, and it was about investigating into the acts of violence over the quota reform movement. So I think if we sort of go for another constitution making episode, then that would also lead inevitably to delaying the process of serving justice to the people who suffered violence. So I think that's all about it. I mean, we probably should go for an institutional arrangement, and the interim government can formulate certain guidelines, certainly, to guide potentially the next parliament that comes to power, so that they can maybe undertake some important constitutional amendments which are very necessary. First of all, definitely I would want political term limit to be there in the constitution. So maybe specification of 2 terms for a political power, for a government to be in power. And there should be far more institutional checks and balances. I think I would also like to see some renegotiation of the constitution with the indigenous, meaning the ethnic minority communities. And also, I would probably want some reform around the entrenchment of the basic structure that is there in the Constitution. The Constitution, interestingly, provides that certain parts and provisions of the Constitution are unamendable. And interestingly, that is provided in the Constitution through a provision that is itself amendable. So I think I would also like to see some reforms around that too. Finally, there is another question about the term for the interim government. So how long the interim government should be there? Uh, Again, the Constitution provides that after a parliament gets dissolved, there should be election. I mean, there shall be election within 90 days. So there are 2 major parties in Bangladesh, Bangladesh Nationalist Party, Bangladesh Awami League. Bangladesh Nationalist Party initially said that election should be there within 90 days. Bangladesh Awami League also demanded something along similar lines. But again, it's definitely a very unique situation right now facing the interim government, and the interim government also has certain reform agendas, as it seems. So what we need right now is a concrete roadmap as to what reforms are going to be there and what the interim government wants to do, and then a clear indication as to when they want to perhaps hold the general election. The students initially stated that they would allow the interim government to be in power for 3 to 6 years, but I would just like to add to that, because I think 5-6 years probably would be a bit too much for this interim government to be in power, since again it's not an elected body. So while it has the popular mandate, but being in power for 5 to 6 years may also sort of um, uh, give it the edge of, or make it being tantamount to an elected government, which it essentially is not. But still, I don't want to give a cutoff time as to this should be ideally the period, because it's always about political expedience. It's also about how the reforms are made and what the plans for the interim government are. So it really depends on a lot of things, and I think it should pan out well in time as to how that's going to be taken care of. But still, I think it should really be ideal for the government to sort of hold election as soon as possible, because that's what uh, the people are looking forward to. Another point to be added here, I think I'm running out of time. I think I'm just going to take one more minute, Jeremy. I'm sorry.
Fine,
Uh,
that's fine.
yeah. So just another thing, I think I really wanted to mention about the investigation into violence, because that's another area that's very important. And again, there is also no cutoff time to that. So we saw enormous violence, disproportionate use of force before 5th August, and after 5th August as well, there were acts of violence. So I think not getting into any cutoff time for violence, the interim government has the constitutional as well as the international human rights obligations to sort of investigate into each and every act of violence, and also sort of at least initiate that process while it is acting as a non-partisan and non-political mechanism, and then go for uh, the general election. Thank you so much. I can be available for answering any questions that the audience may have.
Sami, thank you very, very much indeed for that very effective and very concise explanation of the constitutional and legal positions. I'd now like to call Tarek to speak. I understand he's having some problems with sound. So if he can't hear or we can't hear him, then we'll have to move on to the next speaker and come back. But Tarek, over to you. Tarek is a retired diplomat who is head of the Center for Bay of Bengal Studies. Tarek, you're most welcome, and thank you very much for coming to join us today.
Thank you, Jeremy, for having me on board on this platform. It's a privilege being here and sharing these thoughts with all of you. Sami raised some very, very valid points. And in fact, this is the hot topic of discussions in many circles in Bangladesh now. But this is not anything new. We have gone through this earlier. We have fudged our way through this. I think the first thing is I'd like to set out, I have basically 5 or 6 points. I'll do them very briefly. First, the stage. This is our 53rd year after our independence in 71. So in this period, we've had 3 revolutions, including the one in 71. Then the second one in 1990, which was a sort of semi-revolution when all-party mass movement overturned the long military government of General Ershad. And that government at that time, by consensus, the political leaders at that time, by consensus, said, since we don't trust each other, we have an informal understanding that this will be conducted by a caretaker, neutral, non-party government for within 3 months, headed by the Chief Justice, because we trust him. The underlying word there was trust. The Chief Justice agreed, Justice Shahabuddin, but he said, this is not my job, but I'll come and do it, and I'll go back to being Chief Justice. And then the third revolution was what's happening now. So this is nothing short of a revolution in that sense. It started as a students' movement, and then it morphed when the government lost the narrative. I think they still could have retrieved it around 15th, 16th of July, but they were very stupid in the reactions and in anticipation, and it just spun out of control. Citizens poured in from all walks of life, and the military decided not to fire on the citizens, exactly what had happened in 1990 when the military refused to fire on their own citizens despite Ershad's order. Now, so 3 revolutions, 3 martial law periods, one from 75 to 79, that was after the overthrow of Sheikh Mujib and Ziaur Rahman taking over. The second from 79 to 86 under Irshad, and then he brought in some sort of a apology for democracy, had elections. And the third was in 2007, 2008, when basically the military stepped in to stop the warring parties from going into civil war phase. So those were clearly martial laws. An interim government was then formed by the military government, calling in civilians, and they backing them. So that was a different sort of interim government from the current one. And the current one, as I said, this morphed into or metamorphosed into a revolution at a certain point of time. And I have a theory. If you want, I'll explain to you a theoretical basis of why these things happened, because this is not something that's come out of nowhere. It's been in the making for, I would say, the last 30, 40, or even 50 years. And so I'm not surprised that something like this has happened. In fact, a week before this blew up, I said, this time we are near the edge. We've had elections. Remarkably, we've had 12 elections in this 53 years. So that's more than 5 years for each term. Okay, so I think we've had 2 elections in quick succession within a few months in 1 year. That explains why we have so many elections. But I'm also counting the election of 1970 here, because the 1970 election essentially was in the Pakistan time for East Pakistan. The Awami League government had 161 out of 162 seats. And when the crackdown took place, en masse, all the MPs went into India, but they remained there thinking of themselves. They constituted a government and they didn't function as an assembly, but they were there. So when liberation happened, they were the constituent assembly. They ipso facto formed the Constituent Assembly, and they came and formed the Constitution of 1972, and then the election was held from 1973 onwards. So that we have to be very clear, because otherwise we will get lost in this debate of the constitutionality. Now, coming now, and the constitutional problems coming up, I will pose 2 questions, and I'll try and give an answer to my questions myself. One, if we had so many elections, why were we so abysmally bad in the manner in which we held them, and why were the elections so farcical or sham? Except perhaps 2 or 3. There are exceptions. The election of 1991 under the first caretaker government, the elections in 1996 and 2001 under the non-party caretaker government, they were more or less okay. The first one was excellent, the second 2, with some flaws, still okay. But then these are charters made by men, and men know how to disrupt these charters. That's what happened. And the lack of trust has been there right from the very beginning. You cannot have politics working if parties who are playing a game do not trust each other. That will always happen in a game, but at least they have rules. They both recognize the rules and they play by the same rules. That was not happening. Now, current election, if it's a revolution, by its very nature, the revolution throws out everything that was there before. So I would not worry on that account. The students have been very, very clear in what they want in the demands. And I was quite impressed. They're very mature in the manner they formulated these demands. They don't want martial law, and they don't want a return of the same sort of zero-sum politics in cyclical manner that today's villains will become tomorrow's heroes and yesterday's villains will become today's heroes. That's been going on actually for the last 50 years. What they want is, first, they want an interim government to stay for a minimum of 3 years, perhaps 6 years. They want all the broken or abused institutions like the judiciary and the election commission, and there are other commissions, to be fixed and made truly independent. They want constitutional amendments to ensure this. Now, how are they going to do that? It's a pretty tall order, okay? Now, if we are going to sit down to make a constitution, then that will take time. Perhaps, and this suggestion has also come out, that bring out the old original constitution of 1972. We know how it was tinkered. So fix those problems and then put in the provisos of how you make the judiciary, the election commission, the public service commission, different commission, anti-corruption commission, etc. Make these, give them firewalls so the government cannot break into them. And yes, ensuring the same thing, term limits for how long a prime minister can hold office subsequently, consequentially, or other members elected. So that's one of the things, I think, which we will have to try and figure out how that happens. Why did these elections fail? And I have written about this in my recent book, that I think there was a fundamental hubris within us when we inherited independence. We took in toto all the British institutions and systems. We opted to use the Westminster parliamentary system. But I'm afraid most of the populations of these countries did not have the foggiest idea how this worked. Yes, there was a sliver of the population educated in Britain who would come back with the ideas that this was the fast way to maternity and this is the way to go. But they didn't work it that way in our own home grounds. And we had a very fragmented society, a social fabric to begin with. We not only had Hindus and Muslims, within Muslims we had divisions, within Hindus we had divisions, there are other minorities there, their languages, race. So all these were there. Britain did not have that 80 years ago. You did not have that fragmentation, which ironically you have today. When I compare with the elections just held recently, and I think one British commentator, I was reading his comments in The Guardian, he said, well, Labour has a huge majority, but without a mandate. And that set me off. I looked at the figures. And yes, Labour won for 412 seats, but with only 33.7%. And then you have the Reform UK. I think that's Nigel Farage's party, if I'm not wrong. Now, he got only 5 seats, but he had 14.3%. And that's why he's creating mayhem on the streets. There is something in the first past the post, winner takes all, that is inbuilt hubris, or the Greek word haime, which has been working with us right from the beginning. When we had that principle of first past the post, you left out so many minorities. People came in with only 30% or less. The rest felt excluded and they went on the streets. Perhaps we should have gone in for a representational, proportional representational system. Maybe we could have had a cutoff system saying you have to demonstrate you have 5% of the votes and then you get it. So I'll stop there. I think this is what we have to face, and I think all friends of Bangladesh, because we are a very important country, unfortunately. In the context of the Indo-Pacific, we are at the epicenter of the Indo-Pacific because we are at the apex of the Bay of Bengal, which makes the Indo-Pacific Indo-Pacific. If we explode like Myanmar has, the consequences will be much worse. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Eric, thank you very, very much. That's extremely helpful. And I think your last words are very prescient, that the issues on the global stage about the Bay of Bengal and much wider military interests of China, Russia, and the USA and India are huge within the context of what's happened in Bangladesh. And I appreciate your comments about the British parliamentary system. I'm not totally convinced that the majority of the British population understand how the system works either, but I know full well that the first past the post system has run its course. It does not provide for representative governments or majorities in Parliament. You're quite right. In Britain, the Labour Party received 33% of the vote, and actually less votes than were received in the last two general elections when I was the leader of the party. And that resulted in over 450 seats. But there are now some multiplicity in the British Parliament. There's obviously a huge Labour majority. There's a reduced Conservative Party, small group of Reform, but I'm proud to say a group of 5 of us are elected as independents, and we're working very closely together on this and many other global issues. So we'll come back to that maybe at another call. Thank you very much. We'll come back to you in questions and discussions. I'd now like to call our fourth speaker in, Kalpana Akhtar, from the Bangladesh Centre for Workers' Solidarity. Clearly, the success of the Bangladesh economy is based on largely the garment trade, but also food and other exports. But that also relies on pretty bad working conditions, pretty low wages, and grotesque levels of exploitation. And many of us have expressed solidarity here and done our best to work with the unions in Bangladesh, and will continue to do so. So I see the workers' voice as a key part of any discussion on the future of Bangladesh. Kalpana, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to what you have to say.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeremy, for putting this together, and thanks for inviting me. As what I feel that, it's a momentum for Bangladesh. So, just to let you know about myself, that I'm a former government worker. So the fight I am in, it is pretty much like 32 to 34 years that I'm doing. And this is absolutely an extraordinary time. And all this credit goes to the youth, the students, and all these materials, like all those people who killed, who was brave enough to bring this momentum for us. The time we are now, I feel the air is so light. Pretty much like everyone in the world knows that where we were with the worker rights issues here in Bangladesh, if we just talk about the garment industry, we are like rock bottom wages, like below the poverty line wages that we are getting even today. When workers try to join with the union, they're being threatened, beaten, falsely charged. The factory was that unsafe. Everyone came to know, many of people around the world came to know about Bangladesh from the Rana Plaza devastating accident, which was an absolute homicide, a man-made preventable accident. After many years of having this women, vast majority of women working in the industry, we still need to outcry that we need to free. We need a women-friendly workplaces, or we need a gender-based violence-free workplaces. A complete ignorance on the social protection. So though these all we have been, facing for years, and these all are happening because the collusion of the power that we have been experiencing since the last regimes, or like pretty much like every political government when they were here. The business and administration always been colluded. If we just talk about the last regime, who were in the power for 16 years, in our parliament, a huge percentage of them were the group of government or group of industrial people. So it was basically a business clubs than a parliament that we have been experienced. As an activist, we were being never free to raise our voices. Our phone has been tapped, or they try to go through our emails, or the security intelligence visit to our centers was very often when we were even having the workers meeting. So now, where we are now, we definitely want that need to be changed. The people who are in the provincial government, like in the interim government, many of them have experienced this retaliation. So I don't believe that they will be repeating the same that the previous regime has been done. And there is a lot of change needed to be done in the policy and also in the enforcement as well. Like last 10 years, tireless work of the private initiative called a Code on Bangladesh Fire and Building Safety. We can say that Bangladesh can be role model for the factory safety for other country, right? But why that had to be a private initiative? Why not the government initiative will be making sure that workers, those are working in the factories or workplaces, they don't need, they have a safe workplace. They don't need to die when they're coming to work. So that kind of changes that we really wanted to see from these governments to next. I really believe that the next political government will be not doing the same stupid things that the previous regime done. If they do, then a student already showed that how powerful the people are when they come together. We can definitely make changes. The important change we need to do in the area of wages, the 12,500 for garment worker and a pretty few more bucks for other industrial workers or other sectorial workers is absolutely not enough. The wages they make now, it is not enough for one person, let alone if she has 2 children or 4 in the family to eat. It is not done. That had to be changed. Whether the manufacturers can afford it or no, they definitely can afford the minimum wage that we are being demanding, which was the last demand was 23,000 taka, which is equivalent to $200. But when we talk about living wage, then we need the international companies who are making business from our country to contribute to do the cost contribution that will be translated as a living wage. Our workers absolutely need to be free to organize union, and bargaining power need to be there. That need to be set up. Like, what is the situation now? If we just only pick garment sector, we have over 1,000 union that has been registered, mostly registered after Rana Plaza. And then if we count that how many of them have a collective bargaining agreement, it is less than 50 and they're functioning with difficulties. That trump totally need to be changed. We have a law that where workers have right to organize, right to bargain, but we never were free to do that. It wasn't even when I was in the factory, or it is not even today when workers are trying to organize. But this is the time we wanted to see that changes, and that positive change need to be, sustained when the political government comes into the next, whenever it comes. So these are the hope, definitely. And, I know there is a lot of, the business are in here. We are a production country, but there is a lot of policy being changing or policy being adopting in the European countries. And all of them says that how they wanted to see these value chain. What is the changes they need to see? Let's talk about like CS triple D or mandatory due diligence from German and other countries, or if we talk about some other policies from US and Europe or UK. All of them says that how good they wanted to see the supply chain is, but a strong message to them that all those changes will be not, happen like with an empty word. There need to be a cost contributory program. They need to do with the production country, as well as we also demand that we need to have a just access to justice, or our voice need to be there in those policies as well. So I was hearing like 3 other speakers. It was very wonderful and refreshing to hear from them, like constitutional issues, or in a politically where we are, or in region where we are. But the workers was always vulnerable in every discussion. We definitely want to see that changes. So that's like my input I wanted to give in here, and I'll be happy to answer any question you have. Thank you. Over to you, Jeremy.
Kalpona, thank you very much indeed. And that's really helpful. I'm going to just take one more speaker, and then I've got some questions that have been given to me, and there may be some others that come up as a result of what yourself and the next speaker is going to say. So I'd now like to call in Jay Kerr from the No Sweat campaign, who supports garment workers in Bangladesh and indeed garment workers around the world, because we see the issue of the endless movement of manufacturing facilities from one country to another as often grotesque levels of exploitation follow and huge profits. 50 years ago, I used to work for the Tailors and Garment Workers Union in Britain, which was then a big clothing industry union. There was a big clothing industry. It basically was closing down at that time, and the jobs were going then to Hong Kong, to Cyprus, China, and then eventually to Bangladesh. But of course, there's no certainty that the big clothing manufacturers will stay with Bangladesh. They may well decide it's more profitable to go even somewhere else. So there is a need for global organization to support often the most grotesquely exploited people in the world, which are those that make our garments. By the way, everything I'm wearing, I checked this morning, is made in Bangladesh. Every single thing, even my socks. So I don't have any socks on today. If I had socks on, they would be from Bangladesh. Jay, over to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, I'll just be very brief because I wanted to just follow up on what Kalpona said and really put the perspective of what we do in the UK. No Sweat is part of the Rana Plaza Solidarity Collective, which is a coalition of NGOs, campaign groups and labour rights activists that have come together to campaign around the issues in Bangladesh, because, as you say, it's such an important country for the global garment industry. And as Kalpona mentioned, the Rana Plaza disaster, this is the thing that brings us together to commemorate the anniversary every year in April, and to organise a demonstration outside some of the flagship stores in central London and other major cities, to commemorate the people who lost their lives, but to tie that tragedy to modern day struggles of the people in Bangladesh. So, as mentioned before, the struggle for the increase in the minimum wage that wasn't won in terms of the 23,000 taka that the unions were campaigning for, and the result of them getting a significantly less, a much smaller increase in the minimum wage led to huge demonstrations, and those huge demonstrations were suppressed by the now former government to the tune of something like 20,000 arrest warrants. So we really were demonstrating on the streets of London to stand in solidarity with the garment workers that were suffering oppression back then. As we see now with the situation, the political upheaval that's been going on recently, we're in discussions with trade unions in Bangladesh. We're hearing that the brands are putting pressure on factories, on factory owners to lower their prices. There's instances of cancellation of orders that are coming up, stuff that's very reminiscent from the COVID period, where during the COVID lockdown, brands just essentially abandoned workers, cancelled orders, refused to pay for orders that already been made, and that had a direct impact down the chain to workers' lives who didn't get paid for work they'd already done and went months without seeing their wages. So we don't want to see that again. So we recently put out a statement that's on the website, the Rana Plaza Solidarity website, that calls on brands to do right by the workers and not to abandon them again, and see through this difficult time and make sure the workers are protected, their livelihoods are protected. So that statement is on there. If any of the listeners are part of a trade union or campaign group that'd like to sign that statement, you can go on the website and you'll see details of how you can add your organisation name to that. At the moment, the group label behind the label, which is one of the NGOs that we work with in the Rana Plaza Solidarity Collective, they're leading the way on contacting brands to find out what their plans are regarding Bangladesh, individually, which one of them's which brands are making active changes and cancelling their orders. And as you say, Jeremy, they're often moving from one country to another. So as political situation deteriorates in one country, like in Bangladesh, they can swiftly move their operations to another country and just completely abandon the workers. So as soon as we get to grips with who's doing what and what the situation is, it may be a case that we end up having to organise protests. And I'm sure many of the listeners today would be keen to get involved in those protests. So I imagine someone's able to share the link to the Rana Plaza Solidarity website on the chat, but it's ranaplaza-solidarity.org. Go and check that out and get involved. Thanks.
That's excellent. And just to let you know, Artin's just reminded me, and I want to take this opportunity to thank Artin Giles and Talal Karim for all the work they put into arranging this call today. The Peace and Justice Project has signed a statement that you referred to. We will reinforce it on our own website and our own social media messaging. And I'll ask Artin if he can put up the link to the Rana Plaza link now on the chat box here so that everyone can see it. I've had a number of questions put to me. What I'll do, if I may, is do them quickly and ask each of the members of the panel if they wish to respond to the question. If they feel somebody else has adequately responded to it, then there we no need to. So I'll let you know. The first question is this one. It's a good one. If the interim government is going to review the constitution and make amendments, what legitimacy will it have once an elected government comes into power through free and fair elections? That, of course, is in the context of the Bangladesh parliament being dissolved. And so, in a sense, you have a government led by somebody who's been appointed, and it is an appointed government, not an elected government, who could be in office for several years. And if they change the constitution, what's the reaction going to be to that in the public? Who'd like to go first on this?
Maybe Simon, maybe.
Simon, would you like to say anything on that?
Yeah, so if I have understood the question correctly, if the interim government goes on to amend the constitution, then what the reaction would be, right?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, so I think the interim government, constitutionally speaking, doesn't really have the mandate to amend the constitution. So if it brings any amendments to the constitution, that would certainly not be very easy to withstand the constitutional test of time. We have seen before many constitutional amendments being declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court afterward. So as I said during my speech, I think constitutionally it would be ideal to sort of formulate certain guidelines for the next elected government in power so that they can bring the necessary amendments so that that's also doesn't have to sort of withstand the constitutional test of time and there's no difficulty when the time comes. So that would be my answer to the question.
Thank you. Anyone else like to say anything on that? No? Okay. The second question, what if the new government tries to make it null and void through the courts, as previous governments did about interim governments? Should the interim government not form a constitution commission comprising of members of civil society? And I think this question then relates to Bangladesh's future. And I'm thinking of other societies that have gone through enormous convulsions. Either South Africa at the end of apartheid or Chile at the end of the Pinochet period or during the discussion about the new constitution, where they formed popular assemblies to discuss the future. Is that an option? And is there the political space and appetite for that in Bangladesh to have some kind of citizens' actions as to the future constitutional arrangements and rights within Bangladesh? Anyone care to comment on that?
Jeremy?
Yes, Said, go ahead.
I think that we may be jumping the gun a little bit because we do not know what the consequences, how this whole, for instance, let me give you an example. Sheikh Hasina is resident in India. Is she going to be in India? I mean, these are going to be questions of great, these have to be sorted out. And they will have repercussions in Bangladesh. And they will have repercussions here and, in fact, in the whole region. That is one. The other thing is, I think we are not, the fact of the matter is that it may be completely people talking about conspiracy theories, but the facts are being talked about. People are talking about, for instance, that the that Yunus is a Fulbright scholar and he has 20 other scholarship affiliations with the United States and so on. Now that is very much in the bargain. People are discussing it. They're discussing it here. Now, so some of these elements have to be either they will play themselves out or they will be preempted by some kind of a constitutional decision to hold, to rein in the situation, as it were. Situation is dynamic. We are talking as if it is tranquil and we can sit back and call for new constitution. Yes, a new constitution will be required. A new government will come into being. But the interim is not that. The interim is dangerous to me.
Thank you very much. That's helpful. I've got two more questions, but what I'm going to do, because they're covering broadly similar ground, is to roll them into one and ask you to comment on it. And if there are any more questions coming in, I'll then take those next. If not, I'll ask each of our speakers just to give a brief summary, but particularly proposals of what we have to do next, campaigning-wise and solidarity-wise, because to me, the importance of these calls is actually to mobilize, inform and motivate people. And that's why that's what the Peace and Justice Project exists for. And that's why we're having our conference on the 14th of September. The last two questions are, I'll read them both. What steps the interim government will take to ensure a level playing field in terms of participation of all political parties in the next general elections? What is your estimation of the time frame about this? And the last question, which is broadly on similar grounds, do any of the panel think there will be a third political force, that is, beyond the Bangladesh National Party and the Awami League, emerging out of the current impasse, and which will end the dominance of the two main parties? And what I've been reading is the student-led organization is having discussions about forming another party or not. I don't know the updates on that. I'd be very grateful if our panel could inform us about that. Who would like to go first on this question? Tariq, yes.
Yes, I think the students have already been talking and throwing out, there have been two conflicting suggestions coming from within them. First, they said, we are going to form a party. Then they said, no, we are consulting. But obviously, they are there. They are in this caretaker government, two of them in the cabinet. And we were told that there would be one or two in every ministry. So they are part of the government. The students don't want anything coming back quickly, but the pressures are already building up. I think the BNP is already, as we say, on one foot, ready to leap forward. They will give 3 months, but the pressures will start building up. Jamaat Islami is again regrouped and re-registered and reformed. It's also raring to go. The only party left out will be then the Awami League. And basically then what I see is, and I think Kalpana voiced this fear that we are going to see a reprise of what took place. And as I mentioned earlier, today's villains will become tomorrow's heroes, and yesterday's villains have become today's heroes, and we are not coming out of this circle. Saeed mentions, of course, a very, very valid point. What's going to happen? Basically, I think he has in mind what's going to happen to the Awami League and all the leaders sitting in India. That's also a point. Over here, I have to mention, and Saeed is a good friend, and I'm sure he'll understand, regardless of the situation. There is a very broad anti-India feeling across a broad swathe of society. And this is because of perceived, I'm not saying actual but perceived acts of omission and commission, where the government of the Awami League was seen kowtowing or being taken for granted by India. And this is always a phenomenon where you have a big brother, small brother syndrome with countries big and small juxtaposed against each other. However, at the same time, this interim government has been careful and quick to send out signals to India that we want to continue having good, friendly relations with India. So obviously, this will have to be worked out. There have been also a statement by the Minister for Environment and Water that we will robustly pursue our interest on the Tista. Tista, and of course now we have the double whammy, 12 districts completely inundated by water. And of course the people say, oh, India opened up all the dams and let the water through. So this India-Bangladesh factor and the India in the psyche affecting the politics can never be ruled out. It's a question of how we manage it. It's a question of how we manage it. And I'll come back to the point of whether the constitutional amendments actually can be made or not. What this interim government can do, I think it may have 10, 20, 30 priorities. It'll have to sequence the priorities. What are the 3 or 4 things they need to do within the next 3 to 6 months to ensure that when elections are held, you make sure that they cannot be tampered with, that the election commission will function independently, that the judiciary will be on its feet and will listen to complaints about the election and do that independently. At least these 3 have to function. Number 4, you have to ensure that all the parties or the representatives are able to come in. Because if one party with 35% of the vote bank gets left out, we are back to square one. And that's the point I mentioned, in my previous intervention, which means we are going back into the whirlpool. Okay, that is the question of constitutionality, and again, I think we have to take refuge behind the fact that this was not a constitutional orderly transition of the government. It was a revolution overthrowing the old order. And then you go back to the study of all the revolutions that have happened. They happened, fortunately, we haven't had what happened after those revolutions. We haven't had guillotines in marketplaces chopping people's heads off yet. Okay, so we will do the transition, throw the old order out or amend the old order, bring it back, have a referendum before the people. Have a referendum across the country to the people and say, this is what we want to do. Do you want it or do you don't want it? If you don't want it, tell us what you don't want. That's one way. This is, Bangladesh has been a unique laboratory for political science students on trying to figure out how a new country emerging in the middle of the 20th century actually survives as a state. We defied all predictions, we survived, we did well, but we are still struggling to find the best way, and I think we are in part of that organic, birth pain throes that we are going through. If we succeed, this will be remarkable. And so I would still like to end on that note of hope that we have succeeded against odds. Your title says it all, at the crossroads again. We have been at these same crossroads at least 3 times, and we have come forward slightly better than the previous time. Hopefully in this organic process, we'll go forward again to a slightly better phase and probably have a model that can be applied to other countries struggling similarly. Thank you.
Thank you, Tariq. I'm going to ask Talal to ask a question. I think he's going to merge 2 together now. Ask any or all of you to reply to that. And then I'm going to ask each of our speakers, all of them, just to briefly sum up at the end, just for half a minute or so, just with any suggestion of how we can act from the PJP in mobilizing people. We have 60,000 followers, mainly in the UK, but not exclusively. They're over Europe, North America, Africa, South Asia, Latin America. Also, of what solidarity work you want people to be doing to keep the issue of Bangladesh alive, because I'm very aware that global media has a very short attention span, and there's very little reporting of Bangladesh in the last few days, when a month ago it was, well, less than a month ago, it was wall-to-wall coverage. So Talal, over to you for your points. Talal.
Thank you very much. I think we have had a very good panel discussion by all the speakers. Thank you so much for that. I want to just kick off the economic point of view, what Kalpana and Jane took on, which is, having read about prices going up, inflation going up, Russia-Ukraine war impact, what is that impact having on Bangladesh? With now, I also read about certain major companies from abroad are cutting back on orders. That will have a huge impact on the garment sector, particularly. Is there a thinking about alternative sources of foreign exchange earnings? And Bangladesh foreign reserves have gone down pretty, alarmingly very low. So that is one aspect. That is going to affect a lot of garment workers who are predominantly women. So that is one factor. That itself could lead to turbulence and civil strife, you name it. The second thing on the political side is, as soon as the interim government was formed, Begum Zia made a statement, or someone made a statement, BNP, we should move away from the politics of revenge and retribution and things like that, which was a welcoming statement. However, one notices that has continued. Now that the Awami League are in hiding leaders, suddenly people are picking on, making charges against leading Awami politicians. What is the answer to that? I was wondering, should Bangladesh is now infant democracy, 52, 53 years, no system is perfect. United States system is not perfect. You have Trump being charged, whatever, here you have that as well. Should there be some kind of a South Africa type model peace and reconciliation movement in Bangladesh, where you bring together and talk about, let's solve these issues in a matured way? Ireland has done it. Jeremy was very much involved. Two adversaries were brought together and there's peace in Ireland. So I was just thinking, and the very final one was from Tariq's expertise, is about the strategic Bay of Bengal thing. What is the impact being felt right now? China, India, America taking advantage of the situation. Maybe that's a difficult one. But I mean, there's so many issues that have come out. I think we may have to have another workshop seminar. We were not able to have Professor Hemant Subhan or Mr. Farooq Subhan. It'd be quite good to have them at a future discussion. So I leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Talal. That's very helpful. Who would like to make any comments on Talal's points just now?
Not on Talal's point. Talal made some important points. But I would just leave a thought for all of us. We are here on this program because we are communicating. Now, the absence of any communication between Dhaka and Calcutta and Dhaka and New Delhi and Colombo and Chennai and Colombo and New Delhi and Islamabad and even Beijing for that matter. It's a singular failure of our imagination and how we imagine the role of the media. We are so reliant. So we have to have Christian Amanpour come here to Bangladesh or to Kathmandu to tell us as to what is going on in a country which is 40 minutes flight away from New Delhi. Now, unless we think in terms of a media, a communication, Bangladesh, Dhaka doesn't know what is going on in India. And then New Delhi has no clue as to how the Bangladeshis are thinking and so on and so forth. So let us think about what are we going to do to communicate with each other, since the media, which is monopolized, where, has seen to it that we do not talk to each other. We don't have any communication whatsoever between us, and Dhaka doesn't know what's going on here, and I don't know, and everywhere. The Muizzu's government in the Maldives, or Myanmar, or even for that matter, the near abroad, namely Afghanistan. So we have no clue. We have no bureaus in these places. We will wait for Lise Doucet to make an appearance somewhere, and then all the colonized minds will be riveted and listen to it with marvelous wonder.
Saeed, I love that word, the colonized minds and what they do. That's absolutely brilliant. We now have the best ability ever in the planet's history to understand and communicate with each other and find out what's going on around the world. Yet people are often becoming more and more ignorant, and it's the mainstream media that is one of the problems. The British media, for the past, now the third day, are utterly obsessed with what is undoubtedly a tragedy of a luxury yacht that capsized off the coast of Sicily. Yeah. It's had wall-to-wall coverage on Sky, BBC, CNN, etc., all over the planet. 40,000 dead in Gaza has now been pushed off the headlines. The bombing of villages in the West Bank has been pushed off the headlines, as has news from Bangladesh and other places. So we desperately need an alternative media and form of communication around the world. I don't have all the answers to that, but I do know it's an important area that all of us who believe in a better...
Let us put our minds together and think out
Saeed, you're absolutely right. We should do that. There's a very interesting conference being arranged by the Swedish left in Malmo next May about setting up global information network for radical left forces around the world. I think that's a very important initiative, and we should take a look at that. And I'll certainly be organizing a PJP discussion call on media power around the world in the near future. What I'd like to do now, because there's no more questions come in, is invite each of our panelists to say, in a short summary, what you want us to be doing now to keep the issues of Bangladesh alive, inform and work with the diaspora community, which is enormous in the UK, particularly in London, and how we continue to express solidarity in the future. Just a final reminder that the Peace and Justice Project International Conference is the 14th of September in London, hybrid. It's going to be about 400 people in the hall itself at St Mary University, Queen Mary University in London, but there will obviously be a virtually unlimited number coming by hybrid form online. And Laura Alvarez, who heads the international work for the Peace and Justice Project, is working very hard on this. And before I call it, I want to say a big thank you to her, and also to Artin Giles for arranging this call today, and to Al Karim, whose idea it was and has made such a very valuable contribution today. Okay, who wants to go first? Maybe the same order as we started. A very brief response of campaigning ideas. Saeed.
Me?
Yes, you are, Saeed, I believe.
Well, I personally think it's a wonderful initiative. We have been able to gauge some ideas that are being that are in the air in Bangladesh and elsewhere on where to go forward. I think it's a lovely initiative, very useful.
Thank you very much. Right. Who's next? Sami, you next. Sami, thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you once again for organizing this. This was really helpful. I think I just got to engage with different kinds of views, and that's just so amazing. I would just want to add to what Mr. Tariq said about amending the constitution by the interim government. I think that's a wonderful idea, to putting it on referendum. And indeed, like when it comes to popular movement, it's there is always this option for breaking away from the old order and going for the new one. What the interim government did, interestingly, it took oath under the old constitution, so it kind of showed the signs of continuing with the old order. So I don't know what's going to happen next, but with this discussion points, I think there are really hope that we can move forward with them. And also just one single point about like engaging with and negotiating with the power of language and also the language of power, you know. So the political fields change and the political others also change. So I think it's very important how we handle the others, how we handle the dissents, and maybe the opinions that seem opinionated. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Zami, thank you very, very much indeed. Lovely to meet you on screen. Thank you for coming along today. Tariq.
Yes, very quickly. Stay engaged. What should Britain do? What should all I mentioned earlier also, and actually every power has been engaged in Bangladesh for better or for worse, particularly in the last couple of decades or more. I pointed out the risks that will be posed not just to Bangladesh but to the region and to the world, simply because we have 180 million population crammed into this small piece of real estate that straddles the Bay of Bengal, is the gateway from east to west, and is at the epicenter of the competing narrative on the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific entering there. This, I think, it makes it imperative for everyone to counsel restraint, cooling of heads, not reverting back to the old system. Elections in 3 months, which will be a strong pressure, will land us back exactly where we were earlier, and a repetition of the same cycle. Previously, they were telling us to, make it inclusive. Try and tell the interim government, you have the elections, you have to draw in all the parties, even discredited parties. Let them come and face the people, and let the people throw them out, because only then will you have legitimacy. And I again repeat that whatever form of constitutional reform comes, it has to go to the people. We have to devise a system of referendum. We may have to change the system of governance itself and say it'll be some form of representational government, so nobody feels left out. So you don't take to the streets with your swords and scythes and whatever you have, instead of fighting it out within the parliament. Yes, there will be some lack of organization initially in initial periods. We've seen this in Europe, where they have had proportional representation. We've seen this in our neighborhood also, to east of us. However, through sheer practice over a period of 10 years or so, they stabilize. We have to look at ensuring the long-term stability, because that is good not only for Bangladesh, it will be good even more so for India and for the rest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tariq. Last two brief messages, please, Kalpona.
Thank you. First of all, we really don't know that economically how vulnerable we are now, because we see a lot. I mean, we read a lot of things about that. What is our national loan, etc., etc. But it is also disturbing to hear some of the news is that the brands maybe due to the political instability, they will be downsize their order. That would not done. That should not happen. So through peace and justice, I think that can be one of the campaign that the workers in Bangladesh, they need these jobs. So there is no cut down the order or pull the order, because we believe there will be a stable political situation pretty soon. And if anything happened to our business at this moment, especially worker will be like most suffer, and we cannot afford that. In the same time, very loud and clear that we need these jobs, but we want them with dignity. that can be also the piece of campaign that Peace and Justice can do, and let know the companies who are buying the clothes from our country. So I definitely wanted to stop there with the giving a big thanks to our remittance fighter, our migrant worker, who are also channeling a huge chunk of money at this moment and trying strengthening the our economy system. And I also wanted to thanks to Peace and Justice to putting this together today. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Kalpona. It's what we exist for. And I love the poster behind your desk. It's absolutely beautiful. So we'll try and get a copy of that from somewhere. So thank you very much. Last contribution, Jay from No Sweat.
Sorry, unmuted mic, classic error. Yeah, just to reiterate what I said earlier, if you're watching from the UK and you're interested in getting involved in building solidarity with garment workers in Bangladesh, and Kalpona and her colleagues, check out the website Rana Plaza -solidarity.org. Rana Plaza -solidarity.org. Also, the organisation that is part of the Rana Plaza Solidarity Collective is Nidjo Manush, that are based in the East End of London, that do work outside of the garment industry, more political activities related to the Bangladesh community in the UK, and obviously the communities in Bangladesh. So Nidjo Manush are well worth checking out too. Yeah, that's about it from me. Cheers.
Jay, thank you very much. It's 4 o'clock in London now, so it's time to finish our call. Thank you all very much for coming on. A wonderful panel, very informative, very useful, very motivating discussion. And for all those that are watching us on YouTube or any other means, thank you for joining us. Don't forget, join in on Twitter, on media, on Facebook, on Instagram, all of which is going as a bar across the bottom of the screen at the moment. And follow us or become a regular supporter to the Peace and Justice Project. That's the CorbynProject.com. And we'll be delighted to hear from you and look forward to working with you all in the future. Thank you very much indeed. Salal, yeah?
I want to just thank Jeremy for giving his time and hosting and chairing this meeting. Wonderful discussion. I know he's got so many other demands. He's doing a very good job in Parliament right now of being elected as an independent MP. So he's got a huge task ahead. So thank you, Jeremy, for giving your time.
Bless you, Talal. Thank you so much. I've been elected for the 11th time and I'm back there in Parliament, carrying on being an awkward so-and-so, as I've always been. It's my job. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.